on this episode of The Brothers Mysterium.
Is this fact? Is this fiction?
The body is reduced almost wholly to powder.
You can see the before, you can see the after, but the during is always the unexplained part.
Mrs. Reese are left behind 1 foot, a few pieces of calcined vertebrae, and a head is said by the authorities at the time to have shrunk to the size of a teacup, baseball, or grapefruit.
My brother and I have always been intrigued by the unexplainable. Like many, we're fascinated with stories of the supernatural, fringe science, and modern-day mysteries.
Though we've seen no first-hand proof of its existence, our minds remain open to the possibility.
Unsatisfied with the so-called evidence on television and the internet, we are choosing to take matters into our own hands and conduct our own interviews and research.
Now we're on a quest to speak with as many people as we can and hear the stories of these events from those who have lived them.
No Hollywood effects or exaggerations, and no hidden agenda. We invite you to listen and decide what and who you believe.
We are the Brothers Mysterium. Okay, for this episode, we're going to change things up a little bit and throw you right into a story in order to better introduce today's topic. But before we can do that, we know there are certain procedures and rituals that have to be observed. So, Tommy, if you will.
Let me know when we're rolling.
We are rolling.
In 3, 2. Welcome to the Brothers Mysterium. I'm the man they call Tommy, as always with the man they call Eric.
Hey, yo.
We are the Brothers Mysterium.
Okay, now that we have that out of the way, we can go on to our story. Yeah?
Yeah.
All right, so the story that we want to share with you is about a man named Dr. John Irving Bentley.
Good old Dr. Bentley.
And the tale of Dr. Bentley is a puzzling and weird one, to say the least. And that's exactly why it's the best introduction to this topic.
It's a great case to explore. This is the one that really captivated our interest in the phenomenon and led literally to a life-changing career redirection. In December 1966, Dr. Bentley was a retired 92-year-old physician, general practitioner living in Coudersport, Pennsylvania. Coudersport is in the north-central tier of our home state of Pennsylvania, an area that at that time was largely rural. It was said that there were more deer in Potter County than there were human beings. Dr. Bentley was beloved by the townfolk of Coudersport. Apparently was in good health, though several years earlier he had broken one of his hips, and he used an aluminum walker to motivate to his two-room apartment, which consisted of the sitting room and the adjoining bathroom. Here's the story of Dr. John Irving Bentley. On the morning of December 5, 1966, Don Gosnell, a local meter reader for the gas company, walked into Dr. Bentley's home on North Main Street in Coudersport to read the gas meter down in the basement. He got a customary friendly greeting to Dr. Bentley.
Morning, Dr. Bentley.
And Mr. Gosnell got no response. Mr. Gosnell proceeded through the hallway to what he would later tell us was a sweet-smelling, wispy, light smoke in the air, descended to the basement with the gas meter down there, and then upon returning, he noticed that in one corner of the earthen basement floor was a pile of ashes about 5 inches in height, about 14 inches in diameter. Mr. Gosnell, besides being a meter reader, was a volunteer fireman in the community. He was curious. He walked over to the pile of powder in the basement, kicked it with his work boot, and then looked overhead and noticed in the basement ceiling was a hole about 2 by 3 feet in diameter with cherry red embers on its perimeter. Don told us that he thought to himself, gee, there must have been a fire here overnight in Dr. Bentley's home. Wonder why we didn't get a fire call. Mr. Gosnell went back upstairs down the hallway to exit the building and yelled once again his customary morning greeting to the old doc.
Morning, Dr. Bentley. I'm all set, Dr. Bentley. Have a good day.
Got no response. Being curious, he opened the door to Dr. Bentley's two-room apartment. It was unlocked. Peered inside and did not see Dr. Bentley sitting customarily in the chair in the middle of the sitting room. Mr. Gosnell stepped further into the apartment, peered around into Dr. Bentley's bathroom, and yelled the understatement of 1966. Dr. Bentley's burned up. What he first saw was the leg of a mannequin lying on the bathroom floor. On closer examination, he realized that this was indeed a human leg, and the ashes that he had kicked in the basement moments before had to have been Dr. Bentley's incinerated body. He was aghast. Reported the incident, of course, immediately. And when his fellow firefighters arrived at that scene to, not believe what their colleague was telling them, he urged them not to go in. He said, "This is too disturbing. This is too frightful. You don't want to see this." Of course, they didn't believe what he told them, so they one by one went in and came back shaking their heads.
So, what the hell happened to Dr. Bentley? To help us answer that question, and to help us explore further into the potential cause of the good doctor's demise, is the man you just heard telling you that story.
This is Larry Arnold. We're the director of ParaScience International, based in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Our background is in mechanical and electrical engineering, and we have investigated various Fortean phenomena, specifically known for our work in spontaneous human combustion for 4+ decades.
Because of this intense research on the concept of spontaneous human combustion, also known as SHC, Larry Arnold is now recognized as one of the most knowledgeable investigators on the subject. Even if that name doesn't sound familiar to you, if you've ever seen a TV show or a documentary about SHC, well, then you've probably seen Larry.
Larry Arnold is a writer. He's dedicated himself to the study of SHC.
He's been on shows like the Discovery Channel's Weird or What, hosted by William Shatner, and also Nat Geo's Is It Real?
One of the greatest mysteries that confronts mankind, certainly on an individual basis, is this amazing phenomenon of spontaneous human combustion. It appears to be able to afflict anyone at any time.
Larry has even written a book on the subject called Ablaze: The Mysterious Fires of Spontaneous Human Combustion.
Published in 1995, almost 20 years ago now.
It is something that's always been lingering in the back of my mind is this fact, is this fiction? Something that has always intrigued me. And there's a comedian that I like, John Mulaney, who has a joke that is kind of applicable.
I was a very nervous kid. I was anxious all the time when I was younger. But what's nice is that some of the things I was anxious about don't bother me at all anymore. Like, I always thought that quicksand was going to be a much bigger problem than it turned out to be. Because if you watch cartoons, quicksand is like the third biggest thing you have to worry about in adult life.
And it's the same thing. As a kid, I would always hear about spontaneous human combustion. It was on TV, it was in cartoons, shows such as The X-Files.
Can I ask what you think may have happened?
At first blush, spontaneous human combustion. Of over a dozen case files, a human body is reduced to ash without any attendant burning or melting, rapid oxidation without heat.
Let's just forget for the moment that there's no scientific theory to support it.
Okay.
And I remember as a kid being like, could I literally burst into flames at any moment? Is this real? How is this going to happen? Can anybody at any moment just combust? Every now and then I'll just kind of think of it or hear about it and I'll say like, is that a real thing? And I'll research it, go on the old interweb, see what I can find. And it's hard to get an answer because there's two distinct camps. People that say it is a real occurrence, here's all the cases. And then people that say that's not what's happening, it's this, it's that, there's regular explanations for it. And it irritates me because, this is more of a fringe science episode. We do a lot of paranormal stuff, and it's like, are ghosts real? It's going to debate forever. Even if people say they have proof, no one ever agrees. But if it's like, there's a guy named John Smith.
Hi.
Everybody agrees on that.
Nice.
He's alive.
Woo!
Everybody agrees.
Yeah.
He's now dead. Everybody agrees with that.
Right.
All that was left of him was a pile of ashes. Everyone acknowledges that. So then why don't people admit that? I guess that then the argument is what caused him to become a pile of ash? Whether or not he just combusted or if it was something else. Was it he was smoking a cigarette? Did he somehow catch on fire? And it's like, to me, it's the type of thing where it's like, if a guy or gal is alive, then they're dead. it shouldn't be such a hotly debated, controversial issue. Did you understand what I'm saying?
No, definitely. I understand what you're saying. Yeah. If this is something that you can see the before,
right?
You can see the after, but the during is always the unexplained part.
And it's like a tangible thing. It's not like the body's gone. Did they run away? Their charred remains are left. What the hell happened?
Right.
And why, like, how come I'm here doing my Mysterium thing and I'm fired up and I want to know more? How come scientists, researchers,
maybe you're going to explode
universities,
right now. Maybe that's how it happens. You get excited about something and you burst into flames.
That could happen. People do say that made my head explode.
The Brothers.
Mysterium.
Afternoon.
Hi, is this Larry?
It is indeed.
This is Tommy from the Brothers Mysterium. How are you?
Hi, Tommy. We're doing fine. How are you guys?
Fantastic. Glad we were finally able to make this happen.
It's been a struggle, hasn't it?
It
Glad
has
it worked
been.
out too.
Yeah, perseverance pays off.
Most of you have already heard of spontaneous human combustion, but some of you may not have.
Okay.
So just to make sure all of us are on the same page, let's clarify.
That's a great place to start. It's always best to start up front with the definition of the subject under discussion. Our definition of spontaneous human combustion, SHC, is the ability and phenomenon wherein a body will smoke, blister, or otherwise burn in the absence of a known, identifiable external ignition source or source of radiant heat. What we call classic spontaneous human combustion, which is how history normally depicts the phenomenon. The body is reduced almost wholly to powder.
According to Larry, another characteristic of these scenarios is that the surrounding environment is almost never affected by the heat. Take Dr. Bentley's house, for example.
In Dr. Bentley's bathroom floor, it was covered with an aluminum flooring at the time, highly combustible material. Beyond the 2-by-3 foot hole through which his body had fallen and burned through, the linoleum did not catch fire. Directly above an edge of the hole through which his body immolated was a bathtub painted with enamel paint. Not baked on, but painted enamel paint. We were at that fire scene. The paint did not even blister. Dr. Bentley's aluminum walker was lying askew above the hole through which his body immolated. The aluminum did not melt. Aluminum will melt at about 12 to 1300 degrees Fahrenheit. To consume a body in a crematorium to this extent, we are told, requires temperatures in the vicinity of 3000 degrees Fahrenheit for 12 uninterrupted hours. That statistic comes from Dr. Marion Krogman, based on experiments that he did as an experimental scientist and forensic anthropologist using retorts and cadavers. Directly above the hole through which his body immolated in the bathroom, the ceiling was untouched. We were there. We could stand. We're 6 feet tall, stretching our arm upright. We could touch the ceiling of Dr. Bentley's bathroom. Not a scorch mark on it. Unscorched paint next to the hole through which his body burned. Unmelted aluminum directly above the point through which the body combusted. The presence of a sweet odor in the apartment all fit the parameters of what history has presented as classic spontaneous human combustion.
Very cool.
Most of these cases of classic spontaneous human combustion and SHC do not present themselves as an oxidizing fire. In other words, what happens when you strike a match. These cases appear to be better explained in terms of some kind of quasi-bioelectrical energy, something like ki or prana, kundalini.
For those unfamiliar, according to various traditions of spirituality, prana, ki, and kundalini all relate to different types of energy that are believed to be naturally produced by the human body.
What is reported most often is that the victim is observed to become engulfed in a bright electric blue colored light or fire. And the best description we've had is to make it analogous to the color of flame that comes out at the end of a lit acetylene torch. Less frequently, we have reports of blue, blue-green, gold, white, silver-colored flames. But generally, what witnesses say they observe is this bright, brilliant, blue-colored fire, which again, if it's an oxidizing fire, indicates an extremely high-temperature flame. But if it's bioelectrical energy, that's in line with expecting to see a blue color rather than the orange-red that we associate with oxidizing fire.
What first made you decide that this was a field of study that you wanted to investigate more, write books on, look into? What, pardon the pun, sparked your interest into SHC?
What did spark our interest in making this a lifelong career? Great question. We were introduced to the concept when we were in junior high school by reading a book called Stranger Than Science by Frank Edwards. Some of your listeners may have encountered that book themselves.
Frank Edwards, a veteran Washington newsman, a man who has earned his reputation and his livelihood from his ability to collect and evaluate pure fact, is concerned about it.
Frank Edwards was a news and radio personality who worked for the American Federation of Labor. His book Stranger Than Science was published in 1959. The book is a compilation of bewildering and unusual stories that couldn't be explained using scientific knowledge.
In that book, Frank wrote a chapter called Incredible Cremations and dealt specifically with the case of Mary Hardy Reeser, who in early July 1951 became a tinderbox in her apartment in St. Petersburg, Florida. The local officials at the time were utterly bumfuddled by what they encountered when they responded to the fire call. What Mrs. Reeser left behind was 1 foot, a few pieces of calcined vertebrae, and a head that set by the authorities at the time to have shrunk to the size of a teacup, baseball, or grapefruit, in an apartment that was otherwise devoid of significant fire damage. The fire that consumed Mrs. Reeser was relegated to an area about 3 feet in diameter, included incinerating the chair in which she was last known to be seated. Authorities looked for evidence of foul play. They could find none. They looked for evidence of an accelerant. Could find none. We went to the Library of Congress, pulled up some microfilm from the St. Petersburg Times and the Tampa Tribune, concurrent with the event dated to Mrs. Reeser's demise, and found that Frank Edwards had not made up the story, that his recounting in his book was completely factual. This indeed was front-page news in the summer of 1951 down in Florida. This is a true mystery. When we got the facts of the case that surrounded Dr. John Irving Bentley's personal immolation, and then got the fire photographs, we were just blown away, because these photographs of Dr. Bentley's demise belied everything that we had studied up to that point. Wow. By looking at fire scenes depicted in medical and fire journals. At this point, we concluded that there seems to be a real bona fide phenomenon here that mainstream science is ignoring. And having been brought up with a scientific methodology as our educational background and being innately curious, we decided to see if we could spend a couple of weeks at the Library of Congress and the College of Physicians in Philadelphia going through, medical texts to see if we could find any other cases of this phenomenon. Indeed, we did.
Are you comfortable with the phrasing of that, spontaneous human combustion? Do you think that those words define what is physically happening?
In some cases, absolutely so. In other cases, we prefer something more erudite, more scientific sounding, such as the proposal we've made to call this phenomenon super hypothermic carbonization, keeping the acronym still available as SHC.
For those of us that aren't scientifically minded, in this reworked acronym, carbonization means the transformation of an organic substance, in this case, a person, into carbon residue, aka a pile of ash.
One of the problems with the phrase spontaneous human combustion is that it invokes a lot of xenophobia among fire and medical professionals because it suggests something mysterious, not only mysterious, but supernatural. That's a huge psychological hurdle for an investigator such as ourselves to overcome. But given that background, history has put the label of spontaneous human combustion on this broad phenomenon. So, we deal with it and live with it.
What do you think are the causes of spontaneous human combustion? I know a lot of people have a lot of theories about burning in your own fat, or people have natural gas within them and maybe that explodes, or it could be static electricity. What are your theories and findings on what could be a cause of spontaneous human combustion?
In our book Ablaze, we offer some 120 different theories as to how this phenomenon might occur. One of the challenges that our research has borne out is that the database of the many cases that we've been able to document are so diverse in their nature and presentation that we have been unable to come up with a single or even a few theories that apply broadly to what history presents to us as the mystery of spontaneous human combustion.
Right.
All the cases were alike. It would be relatively simple, at least to theorize a specific set of circumstances or a theory that can explain these bizarre human incinerations. We're not able to do that, which is why we have so many theories. You can throw out all the theories if you wish, come up with the 121st theory if you will. We're certainly willing to entertain that. It's easier to posit what doesn't cause spontaneous human combustion than it is at this current time to posit what does cause it.
And what is the frequency or, the chances, the ratio, if you have any numbers on when these occurrences happen, how often, how many times a year? I know it happens all across the globe. So do you have any kind of statistics of spontaneous human combustion events?
Great question. We do indeed have cases from around the world. In fact, we have cases that fit the definition of spontaneous human combustion on every continent save Antarctica. And there aren't too many people down there, so that's not surprising.
Yeah.
The greatest number of cases we have found for the phenomenon occur in the United Kingdom. Whether this is a result of the British press simply reporting these cases more honestly and accurately, that may be the case. It may also be that there are energies in that part of the planet that are more prone to ignite people and property than elsewhere to produce these extremely rare, and we emphasize rare events, but real nonetheless. In terms of statistics, the elderly are more prone to the phenomenon than is the general population. And we do not find that particularly surprising as the human body ages. The mechanical, the biological systems in the body tend to break down. People become more diseased. So whatever is the mechanism or mechanisms that lead to spontaneous human combustion fire scenes, we would expect to find those conditions probably more prevalent in the elderly. That said, the youngest victim that we've been able to find in the historical literature that suggests spontaneous human combustion was a 6-week-old toddler in a crib. Teenagers, people in their 20s and 30s, can experience this phenomenon. It was once said that all victims of SHC were elderly, female, alcoholic, overweight, and either lived in Germany or France. Our database, which consists now of more than 500 examples that fit the definition of the phenomenon, belie those statistics. In terms of gender, males and females are almost equally represented. Males are 50% of our database, males are 47%, and the remaining 3%, history simply does not record the gender. Many are smokers, yes. Many are alcoholics, yes, but many others are not. Some are sedentary, but some are quite active and mentally alert. Dr. Bentley, while semi-invalidic, was mentally acute and was well aware of his surroundings, not likely to be the victim of a smoking mishap.
A common denominator that I've noticed in just listening to you now and researching a little bit on my own, it seems like a lot of the time there's a foot or a leg left over. Can you make anything of that? Is that true that is somewhat common?
In the classic cases, yes, it is common. There is usually an extremity left behind or a few extremities to indicate that pile of powder between the lower leg or the extended forearm or the shoulders and head once was, an actual human being, a person.
Are there different levels of this combustion? Is there ever a case where somebody, their arm burst into flames and turned to ash, but the rest of their body remained, or they lived, or maybe just a foot, has ever been a half immolation, ever a survivor, anything along those lines?
That is a wonderful and very astute question, and the answer simply is yes. There is such a thing as, we believe, partial spontaneous human combustion, in which a limb will smoke, blister, or burn, but the person lives to tell the incredible tale of their partial combustion.
And have you found people and talked to people that have experienced that partial combustion?
We have indeed. We have been very privileged over the years of research to encounter more than 24 people now who have had the courage, first and foremost, the courage to speak about what has happened to themselves. And secondly, to have found people whose veracity and credibility we have absolutely no reason to doubt or to question, despite the bizarreness of the stories that they tell us. One of the survivors that we've encountered and have the privilege to know both as a survivor and as a friend is Peter Jones, who twice in one day in October 1980 witnessed his body bursting into plumes of smoke that came initially from his groin area as he was sitting on the edge of his bed.
What the hell is this?
And the second time that day as he was sitting in his car and watched smoke billowing out of his forearms.
Oh my God!
The first time it was witnessed by his wife, who was as aghast and perplexed as was Peter Jones about where this smoke came from. They both looked for an external ignition source. There was none. The most dramatic case that we have so far of a survivor was also the first person that we were privileged to interview about this phenomenon. His name is Jack Angel, and his story, very briefly, is that in November 1974, he was a traveling salesman down south and parked his motorhome, which he used as a traveling showroom for the garments that he retailed, at a Ramada Inn in Savannah, Georgia. Went to sleep expecting to awaken the following morning to meet with some clients. He slept through the appointment. When Jack awakened finally, he discovered that his right forearm was charred black, burned to the bone, to use his phraseology. And yet the sheets on which he slept during that time were not singed. The pajamas that he wore during that time were not burned. His forearm burned black inside unburned pajamas. Figure that one out. He got dressed, exited the motorhome, lost consciousness. And when he regained consciousness, he found himself surrounded by a team of medical experts at the Savannah General Hospital, all of whom were marveling about how their patient could have burned in the fashion that they were now examining. We've spoken at length with Jack Angel. We've spoken to two of his attorneys who were initially considering a lawsuit against the manufacturer of the motorhome, thinking that electrically or in terms of its plumbing, something had malfunctioned to cause Jack's severe burn injuries. They had to pull the case from the court 1 week before going to trial because, as they told us, they simply could not meet the burden of proof for the claims being made. Jack Angel is convinced, he told us, that the best explanation for his burn injuries is spontaneous human combustion, and that is backed up by the medical reports we have from his attending physicians who diagnosed the burn injuries as, quote-unquote, internal in origin. We have no way to assess that medical diagnosis other than to accept the premise that, by means presently unknown, Jack Angel burned from within, which is the very definition of spontaneous human combustion.
Right. Very, very intriguing. And now you kind of touched on this, something that's always irritated me. Why has the medical community kind of ignored looking into this more? There are famous cases. You mentioned Mary Reeser, who I believe is known as the Cinder Woman. There are so many cases of this, and I don't understand how it can be so controversial, so debated. Is it something real? Is it not? Why do you think mainstream science sort of ignores these incidents?
Yes, you are correct that Mrs. Reeser was called the Cinder Woman at the time. And the question you raise about why mainstream science wants to ignore this evidence for spontaneous human combustion is one that has plagued and perplexed us as well for many a decade. Our answer to that, the best one we have come up with, is that the phenomenon is so perplexing, so bizarre, so challenging to what fire scientists understand about the behavior of fire, and what the medical community understands can happen to the human body when exposed to a conventional external source of open flame causes them to basically invoke xenophobia, fear of the unknown. That so deeply challenges and affronts their conventional wisdom and education that it's easier for them psychologically in general to simply ignore the evidence or to explain it away by means that simply do not make scientific sense. It's been suggested by the debunkers that first and foremost, spontaneous human combustion is simply a claim born out of medieval ignorance or is a hoax. We have one medical examiner who purported to be an expert on the subject, wrote an article debunking spontaneous human combustion, and labeled the photographs that were shown to him at our request as hoaxes. And Dr. Adelson, the medical examiner in question, when asked why he arrived at the conclusion that these photographs of Dr. Bentley and Mrs. Reeser and other wholly immolated human beings in a fire scene that is otherwise devoid of significant heat and flame damage were hoaxes, his response was, quote unquote, these photographs are hoaxes because simply bodies do not burn this way. End of mystery. Well, we know that the photographs were not and are not hoaxed. These photographs that he looked at were taken prior to the days of photoshopping, and we know the source, we know the provenance of the photographs. These photographs were taken by newspaper editors or fire professionals who clearly had no reason to, hoax these photographs. They depict real historical events.
Right.
Another explanation that you've alluded to already, that the debunkers so often invoke, is the so-called human wick theory, in which the body, once ignited externally, begins to burn in its own body fat, its own adipose tissue, becomes the fuel for the fire. In other words, the body is, in essence, treated as an inverted inside-out candle, in which the victim's clothing becomes the wick, the person's fatty tissue becomes the fuel, and once lit externally, they slowly smolder over many, many hours in their own body fat. We've attempted to do this at the experimental level. We have failed to do so every time we've tried the experiment. You have probably seen, certainly some of your listeners have seen on television, certain experts who use pig carcasses as a stand-in for the human body.
Benecki demonstrates this effect using a piece of cloth and part of a pig.
Wrap it in a towel or sheeting, and in one case, if doused it with gasoline.
If the conditions are just right, the fat and the cloth will burn like a candle until little is left.
What happens in those experiments is that the fire, if it self-extinguishes, there's enough of the pig carcass left that you could easily identify it as a pig.
Often a good deal of the bone remains intact. In cases of alleged SHC, much of the bone becomes ash.
You could do autopsies on what is left at the fire scene in the laboratory. Or the fire rages quickly out of control to the point that the burn chamber is at the verge of flashover. Fire suppression equipment is brought in to douse the raging inferno. And yet we will have the expert standing there saying, look, I replicated these localized fire scenes like we find with the Mary Reeser case or the Dr. John Bentley case, and we can dismiss spontaneous human combustion. Well, at the Reeser case and the Bentley case and hundreds of other cases that we've documented in our book Ablaze, we don't have fire suppression being done. These fires begin and end at the human body. One of the naysayers of SponCom says that the phenomenon is, quote-unquote, impossible because, quote-unquote, there is not one single instance in which internal organs are burned more completely than are outer parts of the body. On that basis, he submits that spontaneous human combustion is simply impossible because those conditions never exist. Well, those conditions do exist. Mary Reeser left behind, as we said earlier, a foot and a few pieces of calcined vertebrae, but no pancreas, no stomach, no heart, no liver. In other words, no internal organs. Dr. Bentley, when he consumed himself to powder, and we stress the emphasis on the word powder. We were being quite literal. Dry, ashed powder was what was left of Dr. Bentley's body, with the exception of one half of one lower leg, which revealed and proved that those ashes once belonged to a human being. Left behind ashes and half that lower leg, which would be an outer body part, but not one internal organ. So by the critique that the naysayers invoke to dismiss spontaneous human combustion, they themselves have proven that, as a concept, spontaneous human combustion is a real event.
And you had mentioned that you also had cases where you had found witnesses and talked to witnesses. Are there any prominent examples of maybe in modern times somebody getting a cell phone video or something of this happening by chance, or even like a group of people witnessing it? Anything like that?
Yeah, one would, and this is one of the arguments that the naysayers invoke repeatedly, particularly now in this day of ubiquitous cell phone technology. Surely there must be footage of this happening. Well, we have only one known example where there was visual documentation recorded of a case of spontaneous human combustion, and we use the term rather loosely in this example. It comes from Italy. The name of the victim was Anna Moreno. It happened in the 1930s, and the story is that her breast would inflame, and this was supposedly filmed by her attending physicians. We would love, for several reasons, to see the footage of this. It must be quite remarkable. It has either been lost to history or destroyed or archived somewhere where nobody can find it to this day. We've often quipped that until someone such as the President of the United States or a leading candidate for the presidency of the United States suddenly erupts into a blazing inferno in front of a bank of microphones and television cameras, SHC will be continued to be denied.
If I'm president, they're not going to get away with it. You have to fight fire with fire.
So let me thank you for being out here on a hot August afternoon.
And only then will it be accepted as, oh, well, we knew this happened all along.
Of course. Modern science and medicine kind of ignores this, but I believe that in 2011, a coroner in Ireland said that a man named Michael Faraday, who died in December of 2010, they listed his cause of death as spontaneous human combustion.
I'm Megan Murphy for the Huffington Post. A court in Ireland ruled the death of an elderly man was the country's first case of spontaneous human combustion, or SHC. On December 22nd, 76-year-old Michael Faraday burned to death in his home in a blaze that firefighters say had no cause and was restricted to his body and the area immediately surrounding it. Yesterday, a coroner ruled that Faraday died of spontaneous human combustion. Officials say Faraday was lying next to a fireplace, but the fire didn't directly cause him to burn up. Investigators also ruled out foul play and found no accelerants near the body. That's what led the coroner to chalk this one up to SHC. The Irish Times quotes him as saying he had never encountered such a case in the 25 years that he'd been investigating deaths in the region. This fire was thoroughly investigated, and I'm left with the conclusion that this fits into the category of spontaneous human combustion, for which there is no adequate explanation.
So I was wondering if there are maybe more recent cases of the medical world embracing or admitting this exists. And also you, I believe, just got back from Ireland doing some investigative work. So we'd love to hear any of your findings on the Emerald Isle.
Indeed, with on the date that we were conducting this delightful conversation with you about this amazing subject, it's only been a few days since we have returned from Ireland. We have been in communication with Coroner McLaughlin, who was involved in the Michael Flaherty case, who went on public record as saying that Michael Flaherty in December of 2010 died by spontaneous human combustion. We are not yet willing to go to that extent simply because we have not seen the details of the original investigation. We have been unable to speak with the first responders of that case, despite being in Ireland and trying to track down, some of those individuals. Mr. McLaughlin refuses now to discuss the case further with us, although initially he was willing to talk to us by telephone for a few minutes. The local first responders acknowledged that there was an external ignition source in Michael Flaherty's fireplace, but they ruled out a connection between the embers in the fireplace and the body itself. We do not know the basis for which they made that determination. So we are a little skeptical. The one photograph we have seen of the fire scene is not sharp. So again, we're not willing to stake our research and our reputation on that case as spontaneous human combustion. Although we, have no reason to doubt McLaughlin's assessment that based on the appearance of the fire scene, that it fits what history has, termed SHC. McLaughlin also declared that this is the first such case in the country. That is not so. There are several cases that fit the concept of SHC that have occurred in Ireland. The most recent case we're willing to stake our research and reputation on occurred more recently than the Flaherty case. It comes from eastern Oklahoma in February of 2013. The victim's name is Danny Van Zant. We spent several days with the first responders in eastern Oklahoma going over the facts of the case, and it is as dramatic, almost as dramatic a fire scene as was the Dr. Bentley case, the one that got us interested in this phenomenon to begin with. Very localized fire, absolutely befuddling and perplexing to the local authorities. Mr. Van Zant left behind at the fire scene his head, upper shoulders, his hands burned off at the wrists, and 2 feet and a heart. No other internal organs remained. No damage, heat, or flame to the ceiling overhead in what was a tinderbox of an environment.
Very, very intriguing. Bringing this sort of to a close, what do you foresee as the future of spontaneous human combustion? Are you finding more people are becoming open to the idea, to accepting, or at least admitting that this is happening to people? Or do you think it's sort of going to be an uphill battle of getting people to admit that this occurrence is occurring?
We're silently chuckling at that last question. Yeah, it's going to remain an uphill battle for some time until, as we said earlier, somebody before a bank of microphones and television cameras goes poof. It is an uphill battle. It's been a real struggle, and we thought we'd have made better progress, wedging away in our research, specifically the research that we've done into the mainstream fire and medical communities. The issue that you raised earlier about why the authorities are so reluctant, indeed adverse to dealing with the concept of true spontaneous human combustion. We'll never forget one fire marshal in Philadelphia when we went to get some fire files from his department on cases that we had in his jurisdiction. And he told us that there were no files to share with us because the phenomenon simply doesn't occur. We put photographs of Dr. Bentley on his desk, photographs of Mary Reese, who explained the situation and said, "You are the expert, sir. You're the fire professional. As a fire marshal, if you went to one of these fire scenes, you tell us, how would you explain it?" His response, one that we would never, ever forget, was this, quote unquote, "I'd go out, get drunk, and forget about it." You can deny the evidence, you can deny the phenomena, you can deny the photographs, but that doesn't make the denial honest.
Right.
If they, and anyone listening to this interview, wishes to know more about spontaneous human combustion and to overcome the rejection of mainstream science and orthodoxy to the phenomenon, you have to address this subject not with denial, but with a sense of discovery and awe. Once that happens, when that happens, and someday it must happen, because these cases are going to continue to occur, and as you allude to earlier, someday someone's going to capture one of these on cell phone or some other means, and in which case it's going to become undeniable.
Right.
Only then will we begin to come closer to understanding what is the mechanism, what is the force or forces that undergird and underpin and can explain these infrequent but utterly fascinating means of human physical transition.
And if any of our listeners want to investigate this more, read more, get in touch with you, could you give out your website information, contact information, any titles of books, anything you have that people could do further investigation on their own and further research?
Absolutely delighted to do that for you. The website is ParaScience.com, PARA Science.com. Not the best website yet, but it'll at least get you in contact with us. The book is Ablaze, ABLAZE exclamation point, The Mysterious Fires of Spontaneous Human Combustion, available directly through us as a signed copy should you contact us by email or through Amazon and other leading providers. The email address is ParaScience2, P-A-R-A Science, the number 2 at Gmail. If you have questions, curiosity, suggestions, or ideally and ultimately leads to possible new cases for us to research and document and compare with our database, please get in touch with us.
Well, it's been a pleasure having you on the show and talking with you. Very educational, very informative. I want to thank you for taking the time, as well as thank you for all the research that you do and will continue to do to shine some light into this area of unexplored by the mainstream. But luckily, you're out there, sort of pioneering the field. So we appreciate that.
And we appreciate the honesty and forthrightness and graciousness with which you've conducted this interview and the provocative, profound questions that you've posed to us. Thank you in return.
Glad we finally made it happen, and have a great weekend.
Us too. Thank you. Likewise.
The Brothers. Mysterium.
First things first, got to thank Larry Arnold for taking the time. It took a while. We went back and forth for a couple months. We're both busy individuals. The Brothers Mysterium are busy. He's busy doing TV show appearances, investigating, traveling, and everything like that. So I'm glad we were able to link up, have that discussion. He was an awesome guest, just full of information, full of answers. And I'm glad to know somebody and his whole group are out there really looking into this and doing it with science. Like he said, they're trying to recreate things. They're doing actual experiments, talking to fire marshals, arson investigators. They're putting in the work. They're not just, there's a lot of, I'll throw it out there, a lot of ghost hunting paranormal groups that really don't do much. They kind of poke around in the dark and then try to draw conclusions. I'm glad that he's putting hard science to this, doing his due diligence. They're investigating things, making notes, getting statistics, and doing all they can to prove that this is happening to people.
And you can tell that they're very realistic about it, because even he said in the interview, we don't want to say too much because we haven't researched this enough and we don't want to stake our name on this. So
Right.
they're aware of, what could be a false claim or what could be misinterpreted and is not actually spontaneous human combustion. So they're not just those people who are like, oh, there's a black mark on the floor. They blew up. Must have been spontaneous human combustion. Like they're very practical about the way they research it. And I have to say, of all the topics we've researched, I would say I would be least surprised if this one turned out to be true.
So if, like he said, if there's a famous example, proof on camera, tons of witnesses of somebody combusting, and then everybody, science, medical, biology, any experts, they all agree, like, okay, this is real. This is now a fact.
Yeah.
You would say, like, I saw that one coming.
Not necessarily I saw that one coming, but I'd be like, okay, it fits. It makes sense. I mean, and like, who knows? Like even he said that, the causes are 120 they had listed in the,
right.
But who knows? Like there could be some kind of internal chemical reaction, like the kind of people eat these days and all that. Like who knows? Like,
well, that's true. And we didn't really get into it that much because there are so many theories, but I mentioned a few. One was like, maybe it's, electric shock, static charge, because a lot of these people had like slippers on at the time, or socks, which that would obviously be an intense amount of electricity to generate.
Oh, yeah.
Another one is people say that, like you were saying, and it's elderly people who are known to maybe be a little more gassy, and there's a small amount of methane and farts and stuff. So some people say that it could be that.
Here's something, and probably some people have heard of this. Have you ever heard of exploding coffin syndrome?
I have not.
Okay, so exploding coffin syndrome is something that doesn't really happen anymore. They put vents in coffins now. Actually, caskets. Coffins and caskets are actually two different things. Coffins are the things that you think of, that shape that, like, like the Dracula coffin, where it's angled and all that. A casket is just a straight rectangle. But they put small vents in them now to that way when a body is decomposing, the gases can naturally leak out. But back in the day, they had a problem with this where the body would be decaying and the gases would build up in the coffin to the point where it would explode.
So it would literally explode. Underground, it would just blow up? Or
I don't know about underground, but in a mausoleum for sure.
Yeah, so that's just another explanation where it could be, there's a lot going on inside of us. And it could be the type of thing too where as Larry was saying, maybe it's not one cause for every person. You know, like, for example, people have heart attacks, but it's for all different reasons. This guy had a blockage, this guy had this, that. So maybe it's not just one cause for everyone. Maybe there could be different events, circumstances for each case of combustion. But like you said, it's cool because it is definitely much more closer to the spectrum of things that could really happen and could be happening. And like I said, it's cool that there are photos of this. There are witnesses to some of these events, people that have lived through a partial combustion. So it's a lot more concrete than some of the other topics we investigate where it's just, you know, we're talking about dreams and dream visitors or ghosts, and it's much harder to delve into. And it's cool also, I love a good science-based episode just to kind of take us out of that world of the paranormal and things that are maybe just out of reach.
Yeah. And just thinking more on it about how he was talking about how the major scientific community and the medical community kind of doesn't pay attention to this. And that kind of makes a lot of sense to me because when you think about it, there are a lot of diseases that are still out there that are documented and people know about them, which are completely underfunded in their research.
Yeah, it's true.
So like who is, you know, what humanitarian organization is going to be like, hey, let me donate money to the spontaneous human combustion.
Yeah.
research,
And like
you know,
he said too, it is so rare. That it's probably easier just to go, as opposed to saying, this is a real problem. We got to stop people from blowing up.
Exactly.
Not to get all weirdly like political and stuff, but it's like, who would make money off that? Unless there's like a pill you could take that would prevent you from...
The anti-combustion pill.
Right. Unless there's like some pharmaceutical financial advantage. Maybe that's why nobody really cares. Although we could probably create a placebo pill and sell it ourselves.
Go into like the new age medicine business here. And so anyone wants to buy any anti-spontaneous human combustion pills, call us up because I just invented it. So
yes, they look like Tic Tacs.
And they cost a lot.
Oh, $1,000 a pop. But awesome episode, awesome topic, another great guest. Once again, got to thank Larry Arnold and the ParaScience International Group for everything that they've done and for just being awesome guests on the show and really enlightening us.
Yeah, that was great. We'll catch you next time.
Next time on The Brothers Mysterium.
And today we're going to mix it up, do something a little different, what we call the Mysterium Bros Q&A.
Right, so these people are all killing in the name of Slenderman.
You know, their uncle was driving through a town when these small kids came up and they, you know, had all black eyes and white skin and they disappeared on them.
Wiltshire, England, the center of the crop circle phenomenon.
If this is the only spot in the universe where life happened to exist and we're it, that's a scary thought.
I do not think superstitions are real.
These materialization seances, they were called.
This is the story of how a ghost walked through my dream.
Songs from this episode include Hail to the Chief and Cello Suite No. 1 by Johann Sebastian Bach, although you might not have recognized it because it was played on acoustic guitar. Clips in this episode come from John Mulaney's comedy special, New in Town, released in 2012 and produced by Irwin Entertainment. X-Files, episode 23 from season 2, called Soft Light. The Discovery Channel's Weird or What, episode 8 of season 2, entitled Medical Mysteries. National Geographic's Is It Real, season 1, episode 5, entitled Spontaneous Human Combustion. The Alan Douglas Show, original broadcast date of 9/12/1966. And the Michael Faraday News Report comes from huffingtonpost.co.uk. We also want to thank Matt Reynolds and Chauncey McGibbons for lending their voice talent to this episode. As always, want to thank Dan and Gwen Hudson for voiceover work, the Nevergrin for doing our theme song. And if you want to get in touch with us or drop us a line, complain, you know, the whole deal, go to thebrothersmysterium.com, facebook.com/thebrothersmysterium, Instagram and Twitter @Mysterium Bros, or you can email us at thebrothersmysterium@gmail.com. As always, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.